He had been cast aside as worthless, until one man looked into her eyes and saw everything she could be. What he did next changed her life forever. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The Oklahoma Territory stretched endlessly under the merciless summer sun of 1867, its golden plains shimmering with heat that rose in visible waves from the parched earth. In a small homestead on the outskirts of what would one day become Oklahoma City, 23-year-old Sarah Montgomery sat motionless on a weathered wooden chair, her delicate hands folded tightly in her lap, as she listened to her parents negotiate her fate with the cold efficiency of cattle traders discussing livestock. Her father, Thomas Montgomery, a grizzled farmer whose dreams of prosperity had withered like his crops in the relentless drought, stood near the stone fireplace with his arms crossed over his chest. His weathered face bore the deep lines of disappointment and desperation. Beside him, her mother Martha fidgeted with her apron, unable to meet Sarah's eyes as shame colored her hollow cheeks. "She's been married 3 years and not a single child," Thomas said, his voice harsh with bitterness. "Her husband sent her back to us like defective goods. We can't feed another mouth, Martha. We just can't." Sarah's throat tightened, but she refused to let tears fall. She had learned long ago that crying only made her father angrier. Her chestnut hair, usually tied back in a practical bun, had come loose during the morning's chores, and strands framed her heart-shaped face. Her green eyes, once bright with hope and dreams, now reflected only resignation. She was beautiful in a quiet, understated way. High cheekbones, full lips, and a graceful bearing that her hard life couldn't diminish. But beauty meant nothing when your body failed at what society deemed a woman's most essential purpose. "There's a trading post 3 miles east," Martha whispered, her voice trembling. "They say men come through there looking for wives, settlers, trappers, even some of the Comanche when they need women for their camps." Sarah's head snapped up. "You would sell me to Indians?" Thomas turned to face her, his expression hardening. "I would sell you to the devil himself if it meant keeping your brothers fed. Don't act so high and mighty, girl. You're worthless to us now. At least this way you'll serve some purpose." The words struck like physical blows, each one confirming what Sarah had feared since her husband John had coldly informed her that their marriage was over. After 3 years of trying, of praying, of enduring his increasingly distant demeanor and the pitying looks from neighbors, he had simply packed her belongings and delivered her back to her parents' doorstep like returned merchandise. The shame had been suffocating. "When?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice steady despite the chaos of emotions roiling inside her. "Tomorrow morning," Thomas replied without hesitation. "I've already made arrangements." That night, Sarah lay awake on her narrow cot in the corner of the cabin she shared with her 2 younger brothers. Through the thin walls, she could hear her parents' muffled voices discussing the transaction, as if she were a horse or a plow. She stared at the rough-hewn ceiling beams, running through every decision that had led to this moment. Had she done something wrong? Was there truly something broken inside her? The questions had plagued her for years, eroding her confidence and sense of worth, until she felt like a hollow shell of the hopeful girl she had once been. As dawn broke over the Oklahoma plains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Sarah dressed in her simplest dress, a faded blue cotton garment that had been mended countless times. She braided her hair with mechanical precision, then covered it with a worn bonnet. Her hands didn't shake. She had moved beyond fear into a strange numbness, a detachment that made everything feel distant and unreal. The ride to the trading post was silent. Thomas drove the wagon while Martha sat in the back, still unable to look at her daughter. Sarah watched the landscape roll by, memorizing every detail. The way the prairie grass bent in the warm breeze, the occasional twisted oak tree standing solitary against the vast sky, the red-tailed hawks circling overhead. She wondered if she would ever see these familiar sights again. The trading post was a ramshackle collection of buildings constructed from rough timber and adobe. As they approached, Sarah could see various groups of people, white settlers in their dusty travel clothes, a few Mexican traders with their pack mules, and further off, a group of Comanche warriors on horseback. Her heart began to pound despite her attempts to remain calm. Inside the main building, the air was thick with the smell of tobacco, leather, and unwashed bodies. The proprietor, a heavy-set man named Cletus Burke with tobacco-stained teeth and shrewd eyes, looked Sarah up and down like he was assessing a piece of furniture. "She healthy?" he asked Thomas, not bothering to address Sarah directly. "Healthy enough. Good cook, can sew, knows her way around a farm. Just can't seem to, well, you know." Burke nodded knowingly. "That'll lower the price, but there's always someone willing to take damaged goods if the face is pretty enough." Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but kept her eyes fixed on a point on the far wall, willing herself to disappear into her own mind, where their words couldn't reach her. Within an hour, several men had come to look at her. A grizzled trapper who reeked of animal pelts and whiskey offered $20, but wanted to test the merchandise first. Thomas, to his minimal credit, refused. A young settler barely older than Sarah himself seemed interested, but couldn't meet the asking price. Each rejection felt like another confirmation of her worthlessness. Then, as the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the trading post, a different kind of figure appeared in the doorway. He was Comanche. That much was immediately clear from his clothing and bearing. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a powerful build that spoke of both strength and discipline. His long black hair was partially braided, with leather cords woven through it, and his face was striking. Strong, angular features, high cheekbones, and dark eyes that held an intensity tempered by something else. Sorrow, perhaps, or loneliness. He wore traditional Comanche clothing, deerskin leggings and a shirt decorated with intricate beadwork, along with a leather belt from which hung a knife in an ornate sheath. He moved with the confident grace of a natural warrior, yet there was no aggression in his demeanor. He appeared to be in his early 30s, and despite the cultural differences, Sarah found herself thinking he was quite possibly the most handsome man she had ever seen. Burke straightened immediately, his demeanor shifting to something more respectful. This was clearly someone of importance. "Grey Wolf," he greeted in accented Comanche before switching to English. "Didn't expect to see you today." The man called Grey Wolf nodded acknowledgement, but his eyes had already found Sarah. He studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. Something flickered in his dark eyes, recognition perhaps, though they had never met. Or maybe it was simply an acknowledgement of shared pain. Somehow, in that moment, Sarah sensed that this man understood what it felt like to be judged, and found wanting. "She is the one for sale?" Grey Wolf asked, his English clear but accented with the rhythms of his native tongue. "That's right," Burke confirmed. "Pretty thing, even if she is barren. Her parents are asking $35. Grey Wolf approached slowly, giving Sarah time to retreat if she wished. She didn't move. Up close, she could see the weathered quality of his skin, evidence of a life spent outdoors. There were scars, too, a thin white line along his jaw, another disappearing beneath his shirt collar. But his eyes were what held her attention. They were deep and dark, like wells that went down forever, and in them she saw not cruelty or lust, but a profound weariness. "What is your name?" he asked her directly, ignoring Burke's attempt to interject. "Sarah," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah Montgomery. I am Grey Wolf of the Penateka Band. I have 7 children who need a mother. My wife died bringing the last one into the world 2 winters ago." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I do not care if you cannot have children of your own. I have enough. What I need is someone to help me care for them. Someone kind." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening just a crack. "How old are your children?" "The oldest is 12 summers, a daughter. The youngest is 2, the boy who cost me my wife. The others are in between." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "They are wild and loud and sometimes difficult. They miss their mother every day. I try, but I am only one person, and our people's ways require much of a warrior. They need more than I can give them alone." "Why me?" Sarah asked, surprising herself with the question. "Why not a woman from your own people?" Grey Wolf was quiet for a moment, considering. "Because you understand what it is to be cast aside for something you cannot control. I see it in your eyes. My children have been cast aside too, in a way. They are pitied. The other families help, but it is not the same as having someone who truly cares. I thought perhaps someone who knows that pain might understand them better." The honesty of his answer struck Sarah deeply. This was no transaction of convenience or desperation on his part. He was looking for something specific, not a possession, but a person who could genuinely help his family heal. Thomas stepped forward, eager to close the deal before his daughter could complicate things. $35 and she's yours. Cash only. Grey Wolf reached into a leather pouch at his waist and counted out the coins without hesitation, placing them in Burke's outstretched hand rather than Thomas's. "I will give 40, he said firmly. 5 extra for her to keep. She should have something of her own. The gesture surprised everyone in the room, especially Sarah. No one had considered that she might need anything for herself. Grey Wolf turned back to her, and for the first time she saw the hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. "Do you ride?" he asked. "I can manage a horse well enough," Sarah replied, though her experience was limited to the old plow horses on her family's farm. "Good. We have a journey of several hours to reach my camp. We should leave soon to arrive before dark." He paused, his expression becoming serious again. "I will not force you to come if you truly do not wish it. But I promise you will be treated with respect in my home. You will be safe. The children need you, but I will not keep you prisoner. If after 1 moon you wish to leave, I will bring you back to the white settlements, and you may keep the $5. Sarah looked at her parents. Her mother had tears streaming down her face but still wouldn't meet her eyes. Her father's expression was impatient, clearly wanting this unpleasant business concluded. She thought about returning to their cabin, sleeping on that narrow cot, enduring their resentment and disappointment every single day. She thought about the emptiness of her failed marriage, the constant reminder that she had failed at the one thing society valued her for. Then she looked back at Grey Wolf. There was no guarantee that life with him would be better. She would be alone among people whose language she didn't speak, whose customs she didn't understand. She would be raising children who weren't hers, children who might resent her for trying to replace their mother. But in his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in a very long time, recognition of her humanity. He saw her as a person, not just a failed wife or a burden. "I'll come," she said quietly but firmly. "I'll try my best with your children." Grey Wolf nodded, respect evident in his expression. He turned to Burke. "I need supplies. Blankets, fabric, flour, salt, coffee if you have it. Enough for the household." As Burke scurried to gather the requested items, Sarah realized that Grey Wolf was purchasing things specifically for her comfort and the children's needs. He was preparing to welcome her, not just acquiring her. The distinction mattered more than she could express. Her mother finally approached, pressing a small bundle into Sarah's hands. Inside was her grandmother's silver locket and a worn Bible. "I'm sorry," Martha whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Sarah." Sarah wanted to rage at her, to demand why they couldn't have fought harder for her, loved her despite her perceived failure. But looking at her mother's gaunt face and trembling hands, she understood that poverty and desperation had made monsters of them all. "Goodbye, Mother," was all she could manage. Thomas didn't say anything at all. He took his money and left without a backward glance. Grey Wolf brought around 2 horses, a powerful paint stallion for himself, and a gentler brown mare for Sarah. He helped her mount with surprising gentleness, ensuring she was secure before loading the supplies. As they rode away from the trading post, Sarah didn't look back. That part of her life was over. Whatever lay ahead, it couldn't be worse than what she was leaving behind. The landscape changed as they traveled, becoming more rugged and wild. Grey Wolf led them through paths that were barely visible, clearly knowing the terrain intimately. He pointed out landmarks occasionally, a distinctive rock formation that looked like a sleeping giant, a creek where the water ran clear and cold, a grove of cottonwood trees where eagles nested. He didn't talk much, but his presence was oddly comforting. There was a calmness about him, a centered quality that made Sarah feel less anxious about the uncertainty ahead. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, they crested a ridge, and Sarah saw the Comanche camp spread out in the valley below. It was larger than she had expected. Dozens of teepees arranged in loose clusters, cook fires sending thin streams of smoke into the evening air, horses grazing in a natural corral formed by the bend of a river. People moved about the camp engaged in various activities, and even from this distance Sarah could hear the sounds of children playing and dogs barking. My home is on the eastern edge, Grey Wolf explained, gesturing to a teepee slightly separated from the main cluster. I keep some distance because the children can be very loud, and I did not wish to disturb others more than necessary. As they approached, Sarah's nervousness increased. What if the children hated her? What if she couldn't understand their needs or communicate with them? What if the other people in the camp rejected her presence? Before she could spiral further into worry, a small figure burst from the teepee entrance. A boy of about 5 or 6, with wild black hair and wearing only a breechcloth, ran toward them at full speed, shouting something in Comanche. He was followed by another child, then another, until 7 children of various ages surrounded Grey Wolf's horse, all talking at once in an excited jumble. Grey Wolf dismounted and held up his hand for quiet. The children immediately fell silent, though their eyes remained fixed on Sarah with undisguised curiosity. Grey Wolf helped Sarah down from her horse, then gathered the children in front of them. "This is Sarah," he said in English before repeating it in Comanche. "She has come to live with us and help care for you. You will treat her with respect and kindness." The oldest child, a girl who stood nearly as tall as Sarah herself, stepped forward. She had her father's striking features and an assessing gaze that was far too mature for her 12 years. "Does she speak our language?" she asked in accented but clear English. "Not yet," Grey Wolf replied. "But you will teach her, Quiet Deer, just as you will all help her learn our ways." Quiet Deer studied Sarah for a long moment, and Sarah felt herself being measured and weighed. Finally, the girl nodded once. "She looks kind, not like Bitterroot Woman who tried to help before and only complained." A smaller girl, perhaps 8 years old, tugged on Sarah's skirt. "Are you going to stay? The last woman left after only 3 days because Little Fox put a frog in her sleeping furs." Sarah knelt down to the child's level, bringing herself eye to eye with her. The girl had round cheeks and bright, mischievous eyes. "I've dealt with frogs before," Sarah said with a small smile. "They don't frighten me." "What about snakes?" asked another boy, about 7, his expression hopeful. "Snakes I'm less fond of," Sarah admitted. "But I imagine if there are snakes in my sleeping furs, we'll deal with that problem when it comes." The children seemed to appreciate her honesty. The youngest, a toddler who had been clinging to Quiet Deer's leg, wobbled forward with his arms outstretched. Sarah instinctively reached for him, and he allowed her to pick him up without protest. He was small for a 2-year-old, with huge dark eyes that studied her face with innocent curiosity. He touched her cheek gently, then smiled. "That is River Song," Grey Wolf said quietly, and Sarah heard the pain in his voice. "The one who cost me my wife but whom I love despite the sorrow." Sarah held the little boy closer. "He's beautiful, they all are." Grey Wolf introduced the other children. Quiet Deer, the oldest and clearly the one who had been trying to hold everything together. Running Fox, the mischievous 7-year-old. Laughing Bird, the 8-year-old girl who had asked about staying. Swift Arrow, a serious 10-year-old boy who hung back from the others. Morning Rain, a shy 6-year-old girl who clutched a carved wooden doll. And Little Bear, the energetic 5-year-old who had first run to greet them. As night fell completely, the children helped prepare a meal of roasted rabbit, cornmeal cakes, and wild onions. Sarah watched carefully, learning their methods and rhythms. Quiet Deer clearly knew what she was doing, but the exhaustion in the young girl's face spoke of too much responsibility carried for too long. The other children alternated between helping and squabbling, normal behavior for siblings of any culture. Grey Wolf sat near the fire, River Song on his lap, and watched Sarah interact with his children. She caught his gaze several times and saw something in his expression that made her heart skip. Hope, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. She found herself hoping she wouldn't disappoint him. The thought surprised her. When had she started caring about this stranger's opinion? After the meal, Quiet Deer showed Sarah where she would sleep, a section of the teepee partitioned with a hanging blanket for privacy. The space was small but clean, with soft furs for bedding, and a trunk where she could keep her few belongings. As Sarah prepared for sleep, she could hear the children settling down, their voices gradually quieting as Grey Wolf told them a story in Comanche. His deep voice was soothing, the rhythmic cadence almost like music. She lay down on the furs, expecting to lie awake for hours in this strange place. but exhaustion from the emotional turmoil of the past 2 days overcame her, and she drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. Sarah woke to the sound of children arguing and smoke seeping through the teepee. Coughing, she stumbled from her sleeping area to find chaos. Little Bear and Running Fox had apparently tried to start the morning fire themselves and had used far too much kindling. Flames licked dangerously high while the younger children backed away, eyes wide with fear. Grey Wolf was nowhere to be seen. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed a blanket and began smothering the flames, directing Quiet Deer to move the smaller children outside. Once the fire was under control, reduced to manageable coals, Sarah sat back on her heels, her heart pounding. The 2 boys responsible looked terrified, clearly expecting punishment. Instead, Sarah pulled them close. "You could have been hurt," she said gently but firmly. "Fire is not a toy, it's a tool that must be treated with respect. Do you understand?" They nodded solemnly, and Running Fox whispered, "We just wanted to help. Father is always so tired." Sarah's heart ached. These children were trying so hard to ease their father's burden, but they were still just children. "I know you wanted to help. That's good. But from now on we start the fire together until you're older. Agreed?" "Agreed," they chorused. Grey Wolf appeared in the entrance, having been down at the river checking fish traps. Grey Wolf appeared in the entrance, having been down at the river checking fish traps. He took in the scene immediately, the smoking remnants of the too large fire, his son's guilty expressions, and Sarah with her arms around both boys. His expression remained neutral, but Sarah noticed the tension in his shoulders ease slightly when he saw that everyone was safe. "They were trying to help," Sarah explained quickly, not wanting the boys to be punished for their good intentions. "We've talked about fire safety. It won't happen again." Grey Wolf nodded slowly, his dark eyes meeting hers with something that looked like gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. Then, turning to his sons, he spoke in Comanche, his tone firm but not harsh. The boys nodded vigorously, clearly relieved, before scampering outside. Over the following weeks, Sarah settled into a rhythm she had never expected to find. The days were filled with constant activity: cooking, mending clothes, teaching the younger children, learning Comanche words and phrases from Quiet Deer, and gradually understanding the complex social structure of the camp. The work was harder than anything she had done on her parents' farm, but it felt different. Here, she was needed. Here, her efforts mattered to people who showed genuine appreciation. The children slowly opened up to her. Morning Rain, the shy 6-year-old, began seeking Sarah out for comfort when she had nightmares. Laughing Bird taught her which plants were edible and which should be avoided, giggling at Sarah's mispronunciations of Comanche names. Swift Arrow, the serious 10-year-old, gradually stopped viewing her with suspicion and began asking her questions about white people's customs, genuinely curious about her world. Little Bear and Running Fox got into constant mischief, but they always came to Sarah to confess their transgressions, trusting that she would be fair. And River Song, the toddler whose birth had cost his mother's life, attached himself to Sarah with the uncomplicated devotion of a child who had found someone to love him unconditionally. But it was Quiet Deer who surprised Sarah the most. The 12-year-old had been carrying the weight of her absent mother for 2 years, trying to be an adult when she was still a child herself. One evening, about 3 weeks after Sarah's arrival, Quiet Deer finally broke. She had been struggling to tan a deer hide, a task her mother had been teaching her before she died. When the hide tore, Quiet Deer threw down her tools and burst into tears. Sarah immediately went to her, pulling the girl into her arms despite Quiet Deer's initial resistance. "I can't do it," the girl sobbed. "I can't do anything right. Mother would be so disappointed. I'm supposed to take care of everyone, but I'm failing." "Oh, sweet girl," Sarah whispered, her own eyes filling with tears. "You've been trying to do the work of a grown woman while you're still just a child. Your mother wouldn't be disappointed. She would be heartbroken that you've had to carry this burden alone. But you're not alone anymore. Let me help you. Let me carry some of this weight." Quiet Deer clung to her, crying out 2 years of grief and exhaustion and fear. When the storm finally passed, she looked up at Sarah with red-rimmed eyes. "Will you teach me, not just the work, but how to be strong like you?" Sarah nearly laughed at the irony. Strong? She had been sold by her own parents, cast aside by her husband, deemed worthless by her entire community. But looking at this brave, exhausted girl, she realized something profound. Maybe strength wasn't about never breaking. Maybe it was about continuing even after you had been broken. "I'll teach you everything I know," Sarah promised, "and we'll learn the things neither of us knows together." From that night forward, the bond between Sarah and Quiet Deer deepened into something precious. The girl began to smile more, to laugh with her siblings instead of constantly managing them. She started being 12 years old again. Sarah's relationship with Grey Wolf evolved more slowly, built on quiet moments and shared understanding. He would return from hunting and find her singing to River Song, and something in his expression would soften. She would wake early to find he had already started the fire and left fresh water, small gestures of consideration that spoke louder than words. They began to talk in the evenings after the children slept. Grey Wolf told her about his wife, Falling Star, who had been his partner since they were both 16. He spoke of her with love and loss, never trying to hide his grief. Sarah found herself sharing her own story. The shame of her failed marriage, the pain of being deemed defective, the heartbreak of her parents' rejection. "Your people are foolish," Grey Wolf said one night, his voice intense. "They measure a woman's worth by only one thing, ignoring all others. You are patient with children who are not yours. You are kind when you have every reason to be bitter. You learn our ways without complaint. You bring laughter back to this home. These things have great value." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Your wife must have been remarkable for you to love her so deeply." "She was," Grey Wolf agreed. "But she is gone, and I must live in this world, not the past. My children need me present, not lost in grief." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "You have given them something I could not, joy again. For that, I am grateful beyond words." Their hands were resting near each other on the ground between them. Slowly, tentatively, Grey Wolf moved his hand to cover hers. Sarah's breath caught. It wasn't a passionate gesture, but it was intimate in its own way. A connection, an acknowledgement of something growing between them. But their peaceful existence was shattered one morning when riders approached the camp. They were Comanche warriors from another band, and they brought troubling news. White soldiers were moving through the territory, forcing tribes onto reservations. Several camps had already been attacked. The Penateka band's chief, a wise elder named Stone Bear, called a council to decide their course of action. Grey Wolf was obligated to attend as a senior warrior, and Sarah could see the conflict in his eyes. He didn't want to leave his family unprotected, but his duty to his people demanded his presence. "I must go," he told Sarah. "The council may last several days. Quiet Deer knows what to do if there is danger. Take the children and hide in the caves by the northern ridge. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded, fear clawing at her throat. "Be careful." Something flickered in Grey Wolf's eyes at her concern. He reached out and touched her face gently, a gesture that felt significant. "I will return," he promised. For 2 days, tension hung over the camp like a storm cloud. The women and children went about their tasks, but everyone was listening, watching. Sarah kept the children close, teaching them songs to distract them from their worry. She had just finished preparing the evening meal on the second day, when the sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the council meeting. Chaos exploded. Women screamed, grabbing children and possessions. Sarah's instincts kicked in immediately. "Quiet Deer, gather your siblings. Morning Rain, hold River Song, Swift Arrow, lead them to the caves like your father said." The older children moved with impressive speed, years of their father's training showing in their disciplined response. But as they ran toward the ridge, Sarah realized Little Bear was missing. She spun around and saw him frozen in terror near their teepee, staring at the smoke rising in the distance where his father had gone. Without hesitation, Sarah ran back. She grabbed the little boy and held him close as bullets kicked up dirt nearby. A group of white soldiers had broken away from the main attack and were riding toward the camp. Sarah ran as fast as she could, her lungs burning. Little Bear clutched against her chest. She made it to the tree line just as a soldier raised his rifle toward her. Time seemed to slow. Sarah threw herself behind a large rock, covering Little Bear with her body, preparing for the impact of a bullet. But instead she heard a different sound, the whistling of arrows and the war cries of Comanche warriors counterattacking. Grey Wolf appeared like an avenging spirit, his face painted for battle, his powerful frame radiating lethal intent. He and several other warriors drove the soldiers back with a fierce assault that spoke of years of warfare experience. When the immediate danger passed, Grey Wolf ran to where Sarah crouched with his son. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands running over them both, checking for injuries. "We're fine," Sarah managed, though she was shaking. "The others are in the caves like you said." Grey Wolf pulled them both into his arms, his heart pounding against Sarah's cheek. "You came back for him. You could have run to safety, but you came back." "Of course I did," Sarah said, surprised he would think otherwise. "He's my—" She stopped, unsure how to finish. "Your son," Grey Wolf suggested gently, pulling back to look at her. "Is that what you were going to say?" Sarah looked at Little Bear, who was clinging to her with complete trust, then at Grey Wolf, whose eyes held an intensity that made her heart race for entirely different reasons. "Yes," she whispered. "They're all mine now. All of them. I love them." Something profound shifted in Grey Wolf's expression. "And what of their father?" he asked quietly. "Could you love him as well?" Sarah's breath caught. Over the past weeks she had felt something growing between them. Respect, certainly, and friendship, but also something deeper that she had been afraid to name. Looking at him now, this strong, honorable man who had seen her worth when no one else did, who had given her a family and a purpose, she knew the answer. "I think I already do," she admitted. Grey Wolf cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "When Falling Star died, I thought I would never feel whole again. I thought I would spend my life going through motions, caring for my children but never truly living. Then you came, and slowly, light returned to the darkness. You did not try to replace her. You simply made space for yourself beside her memory, and in doing so, you healed us all." He leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture of intimacy and connection. "I want you to be my wife, Sarah. Not because I purchased you, but because I choose you. Because you choose us. Will you stay with me? Will you let me love you as you deserve to be loved?" Sarah felt tears streaming freely now, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of finally finding where she belonged. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll stay. I'll be your wife." Little Bear, still held between them, suddenly piped up. "Does this mean Sarah is our real mother now?" Grey Wolf laughed, the sound rich and genuine, and Sarah realized it was the first time she had heard him truly laugh. "If she will have us, yes." The attack had been repelled, but the message was clear. The old ways were ending. Over the following weeks, the Penteca band faced a difficult decision. Stone Bear proposed that they negotiate with the white authorities for a peaceful settlement on reservation land, rather than fight a war they could not win. It was a bitter choice, but Grey Wolf and many others recognized the wisdom in survival over pride. During this time of upheaval and uncertainty, Grey Wolf and Sarah were married in a traditional Comanche ceremony. The children decorated her dress with beads and feathers, their excitement infectious. Quiet Deer braided Sarah's hair in the style of Comanche women, marking her transition into their world. As Sarah stood beside Grey Wolf, their hands bound together with a woven cord while the shaman blessed their union, she looked at the 7 children who had become hers, who had always been hers, really, from the moment she had seen their need and chosen to meet it. They were smiling, even little River Song, who was clapping his chubby hands. The ceremony concluded with a feast, and as the sun set over the Oklahoma plains, Sarah found herself surrounded by people who called her family, friend, sister. The woman who had been sold as worthless had found her worth. The woman who had been cast aside for being unable to conceive had become a mother to 7. The woman who had thought herself unlovable had found a man who saw her clearly and loved her anyway. That night, in the privacy of their expanded teepee, Grey Wolf held Sarah close. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice soft in the darkness. Sarah thought about her journey from the shame and rejection of her old life to this moment of complete belonging. She thought about the children sleeping peacefully nearby, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. She thought about the man whose arms held her, who had given her everything she had been told she could never have. "I'm more than happy," she whispered. "I'm home." Grey Wolf kissed her then, tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. Outside, the stars shone brilliantly over the plains, bearing witness to a love born from loss and shaped by choice. The path ahead would not be easy. Reservation life would bring new challenges, new griefs, new obstacles to overcome. But they would face it together, a family forged not by blood alone, but by love, respect, and the unshakable bond of people who had found each other when they needed it most. Months later, as winter settled over their new home on the reservation, Sarah sat by the fire with River Song on her lap, teaching him English words while Quiet Deer helped her younger siblings with their lessons. Grey Wolf entered from checking their horses, snow dusting his shoulders. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene, his children healthy and laughing, his wife beautiful and confident in her role, his home filled with warmth and love. He caught Sarah's eye, and she smiled at him with such radiant happiness that his breath caught. She had been told she was broken, but she had never been broken at all. She had simply been waiting for a place where her particular strengths were needed, where her capacity for love could flourish. In saving his family, she had saved herself, and in choosing her when no one else would, Grey Wolf had found not just a mother for his children, but a partner, a love, and a future full of hope. They had both learned that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the hardest soil, and that family is not always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who see you, truly see you, and choose to love you anyway. As spring approached and new life began to emerge across the plains, Sarah discovered something that filled her with wonder and joy. She was pregnant. The doctor at the reservation, a kind older man, confirmed what she had hardly dared to hope. When she told Grey Wolf, he lifted her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at once. The children danced around them, overjoyed at the prospect of a new sibling. "You see?" Grey Wolf whispered into her hair. "You were never broken. You were just waiting for the right soil in which to bloom." Sarah held him close, one hand resting on her still flat stomach, surrounded by the chaotic joy of their 7 children. She thought about the woman who had been sold at a trading post, deemed worthless and discarded. That woman seemed like a stranger now. In her place stood someone strong, someone loved, someone who had found her purpose not in spite of her perceived failures, but because of the journey they had forced her to take. She had been told she couldn't conceive, but she had become a mother to 7. She had been sold like property, but she had found true partnership. She had been cast aside by those who should have loved her, but she had found a family who would never let her go. And now, miraculously, impossibly, she was going to bring new life into the world, a symbol of hope and renewal, of love's power to heal and transform. As the sun set on another day, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Sarah looked around at her family, every precious face, every beautiful soul, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her story hadn't ended when her parents sold her. It had begun, and the chapters ahead promised to be filled with love, laughter, challenges overcome, and the simple, profound joy of belonging. Grey Wolf took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Thank you," he said softly, "for choosing us, for loving us, for being the miracle my family needed." Sarah smiled through happy tears. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself, for giving me a reason to hope again, for loving me not despite my past but including all of it." They stood together as darkness fell, their children playing nearby, their future stretching out before them bright with possibility. 2 broken people had found each other, and in the finding had become whole. It was a love story unlike any other, born from hardship, strengthened by choice, and blessed with the kind of happiness that only comes when you've known true sorrow and survived it. And so Sarah Montgomery, who had become Sarah Grey Wolf, lived out her days surrounded by love, raising her children with wisdom and joy, growing old beside a man who cherished her, and never once regretting the path that had led her to that trading post where her real life had begun. She had been sold for being unable to conceive, but she had found something far more valuable than biological children. She had found a family who chose her, a love that completed her, and a home that would forever be her sanctuary. Their story became legend among both the Comanche people and the white settlers who heard of it, a testament to the power of love to transcend culture, to overcome prejudice, and to heal even the deepest wounds. And every time Sarah held her newborn daughter in her arms, surrounded by her 7 other children and her devoted husband, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her home.